It was Christmas Eve, and the snow had been falling steadily since morning. My husband, Ben, and I had just moved into a new house in a small, snowy town. It was the kind of place where everyone decorated their homes with string lights and wreaths, and the streets were lined with festive displays. We were exhausted from unpacking, but the house already felt cozy with the smell of pine from the Christmas tree and the crackling fire in the hearth. Our plans for the evening were simple: hot cocoa, a holiday movie, and bed. But as night fell, something about the house, about the town, started to feel different. It started with the snowman. We first noticed it just after dinner, standing in the front yard near the sidewalk. It was tall and lumpy, with crooked branches for arms and a scarf wrapped loosely around its neck. Its face was odd, a jagged grin made of rocks and coal for eyes, one of which had fallen off. "Looks like someone got creative," Ben said with a chuckle, peering out the window. "Neighborhood kids, probably." I nodded, but something about it made me uneasy. It hadn't been there earlier. And the face, it wasn't playful or whimsical. It was unsettling. By 9 p.m., the snow was coming down harder. I made us mugs of cocoa while Ben set up a Christmas movie. As I walked back into the living room, I glanced out the window again. The snowman was still there, but it seemed closer now, standing just a few feet away from the porch. "Did you see that?" I asked Ben. "See what?" he said, not looking up from his phone. "The snowman," I said, pointing. "It's closer." He came over to the window, squinting at the yard. "It's just the snow piling up around it," he said. "Relax. It's not going to walk up to the house." I laughed nervously, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange sound, a faint scraping noise, like something being dragged across the porch. I nudged Ben awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. He groaned, sitting up. The noise stopped. We both listened for a moment, but all we could hear was the wind howling outside. "It's probably just the wind," he said, rolling over. "Go back to sleep." I tried, but the unease kept gnawing at me. The next morning, Christmas Day, we woke up to a winter wonderland. The snow was pristine, untouched except for a single set of tracks leading from the sidewalk to our front porch. Ben stared at them, his brow furrowed. "Must have been an animal," he said, though his voice lacked confidence. I stepped outside, pulling my coat tight against the cold. The snowman was gone. In its place was a pile of snow, as if it had melted, or collapsed. "What kind of animal leaves tracks like that?" I asked, gesturing to the long, deep grooves in the snow. Ben didn't answer. That night, the knocking started. It was faint at first, just a light tap-tap-tap at the front door. I froze, my heart pounding. Ben grabbed a flashlight and went to check, but when he opened the door, no one was there. The snow was falling heavily again, erasing any sign of footprints. But just beyond the porch, in the glow of the street light, stood the snowman. It was taller now, its jagged grin wider, its single coal eye staring directly at the house. "All right, this is getting ridiculous," Ben said, stepping out onto the porch. "Who's out there? Show yourself!" I grabbed his arm, pulling him back inside. "Ben, don't," I said. "It's not worth it." He sighed, shutting the door. "Probably just kids messing around," he muttered. But I could see the unease in his eyes. We double-checked the locks and went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m. I heard it again, the scraping sound, louder this time, circling the house. I crept to the window, peeking out through the curtains. The snowman was back in the yard, closer than ever. Its arms were raised now, the jagged branches pointing toward the house. And then it moved. The snowman shifted, its body tilting slightly, almost imperceptibly. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. "Ben!" I hissed, shaking him awake. "It moved! I swear to God it moved!" He groaned, but when he saw the panic in my eyes, he grabbed the flashlight and headed for the door. "Stay inside," he said, pulling on his coat. "I'll handle this." "Ben, no!" I said, grabbing his arm. But he was already outside, trudging through the snow toward the snowman. I watched from the window, my hands trembling. Ben stood in front of the snowman, shining the flashlight at it. For a moment, nothing happened. And then the light went out. "Ben!" I screamed, throwing open the door. The snow whipped around me, stinging my face as I stumbled into the yard. The snowman was gone. Ben was gone. I spun around, my breath fogging in the freezing air. "Ben!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The only sound was the wind. I spent the rest of the night searching, but there was no sign of him. When the police arrived the next morning, they found no footprints, no signs of a struggle. Just me, hysterical, clutching his flashlight. The snowman never came back. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the scraping sound again, faint, deliberate, circling the house. And I wonder if Ben is still out there, somewhere in the snow, watching. Christmas had always been my favorite time of year. The twinkling lights, the smell of pine, and the warmth of being with loved ones, it was the one season where everything seemed right in the world. But that year, Christmas didn't feel the same. My wife, Sarah, and I had recently moved into an old Victorian house on the edge of a small town. It was beautiful but needed work. The previous owner had been a hoarder, leaving behind piles of junk and furniture that we slowly cleared out. The house had its quirks, of course. The pipes groaned, the windows rattled in the wind, and the basement door never seemed to stay shut. But we chalked it up to the house's age and focused on making it our own. By mid-December, we were nearly done unpacking. The living room was the first space we finished, and it looked perfect with the Christmas tree glowing softly in the corner. Sarah had gone all out with the decorations, garlands, candles, and an antique nutcracker she'd found at a local thrift store. But there was one thing we didn't put there, the gift. It appeared under the tree one evening while we were watching a movie. I noticed it first, a small box wrapped in red paper with a gold bow. It didn't have a tag, and neither of us remembered buying it. "Did you put that there?" I asked Sarah. She shook her head, her brow furrowed. "No. I thought you did." We stared at the box for a long moment before I finally picked it up. It was light, almost weightless, and perfectly wrapped. Something about it felt off. "I guess someone left it for us," I said, though I didn't believe it. We didn't know anyone in the neighborhood yet, and the idea of someone sneaking into the house didn't sit right. We decided to leave it alone, figuring it was some harmless prank. But the next morning, there was another gift. This one was larger, wrapped in green paper with a silver ribbon. Like the first, it had no tag. This time, I opened it. Inside was a single black and white photo of our living room, taken from somewhere near the tree. My stomach turned as I stared at it. The photo was recent, the decorations were the same, and the fire was still burning in the hearth. Sarah gasped when she saw it. "Who took that?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said, my voice shaking. "But we're changing the locks." That night, I double-checked every door and window, making sure they were locked tight. I even propped a chair under the doorknob of the basement door, just in case. Sarah and I slept with the lights on, but neither of us got much rest. The third gift appeared the next morning. It was larger than the first two, wrapped in glossy silver paper. My hands trembled as I tore it open, revealing a small wooden box. Inside was a music box, its surface intricately carved with swirling patterns. When I turned the crank, it played a haunting melody I didn't recognize. Sarah covered her ears. "Stop it," she said, her voice panicked. "Just stop." I closed the lid and shoved the box into a drawer, my mind racing. Someone was playing with us, but I had no idea who or why. That evening, while Sarah was in the shower, I heard it again, the melody from the music box. Faint at first, but growing louder. I opened the drawer where I'd put it, but the box was gone. The sound seemed to be coming from the basement. I grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the door, my heart pounding. The chair I'd propped against it was on the floor, the door slightly ajar. The melody grew louder as I stepped inside, the air cold and damp. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the stone walls. There was no response. The melody stopped abruptly, leaving the basement in eerie silence. I searched every corner but found nothing. No music box, no intruder, just the faint smell of earth and something metallic. When I came back upstairs, Sarah was waiting for me, her face pale. "What's wrong?" I asked. She held up her phone, her hands shaking. "I got this, while you were down there." It was a text from an unknown number. The message was simple. "Do you like the gifts?" We called the police that night, but they didn't find anything. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing. The officer suggested it might be a prank or a tech-savvy neighbor trying to scare us. But I knew it was more than that. The next morning, we found another gift. This one was unwrapped, sitting in the middle of the living room. It was an old, leather-bound book with no title. Inside were pages filled with strange symbols and handwritten notes in a language I didn't recognize. Sarah refused to touch it. "We need to leave," she said, her voice trembling. "This isn't normal." I wanted to agree, but a part of me needed answers. Who was doing this? And why? I spent the rest of the day researching the symbols in the book, but I couldn't find anything useful. The notes mentioned something about an invitation and a gift not to be refused. That night, the knocking started. It was soft at first, just a faint tap-tap-tap at the front door. Then it grew louder, more insistent. Sarah grabbed my arm, her face pale. "Don't open it," she whispered. But the knocking didn't stop. It moved, to the windows, to the back door, to the walls. I grabbed a kitchen knife and shouted, "Whoever you are, leave us alone!" The knocking stopped. For a moment, the house was silent. Then we heard it, the creak of floorboards upstairs. We locked ourselves in the bedroom and called the police again. They arrived within minutes, but by the time they searched the house, there was no sign of anyone. Just us, pale and shaking, clutching the strange book. The officer looked at us like we were crazy. "If it happens again, let us know," he said, though his tone suggested he didn't expect to hear from us. We decided to leave the next day. Whatever was happening, we didn't want to stick around to find out. But as we packed our bags, we found one last gift waiting by the door. It wasn't wrapped. It was a picture frame, the glass cracked. Inside was a photo of Sarah and me, taken from somewhere inside the house. And behind us, in the shadows, was a figure. It was the first Christmas Eve I'd spent alone. My parents had retired to Florida that summer, and with travel costs being what they were, I couldn't afford to fly down for the holidays. My younger sister, Erica, was spending the holiday with her fiancé's family, and the few friends I had nearby were all busy with their own celebrations. I told myself I didn't mind. I had my small apartment, a stack of holiday movies, and the smell of freshly baked cookies to keep me company. Besides, I had work the next morning, so a quiet night in was just what I needed, or so I thought. The first sign that something was off came around 8 p.m. I was curled up on the couch, halfway through Home Alone, when I heard a faint knock at the door. It was soft, almost hesitant, and for a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. But then it came again, 3 light taps, barely audible over the sound of the movie. I paused the TV and got up, peering through the peephole. The hallway was empty. My heart raced as I unlocked the door and cracked it open, the cold air rushing in. There was no one there. But something caught my eye, a single candy cane, perfectly wrapped, sitting on the welcome mat. I picked it up, my skin prickling as I looked up and down the hallway. The building was silent, the other apartment doors closed and locked. I shrugged it off, figuring it was a harmless gesture from one of the neighbors, and went back inside. An hour later, the knocking started again. This time, it was louder, more insistent. I jumped, spilling my mug of cocoa as I grabbed my phone and headed for the door. The peephole revealed the same empty hallway, but when I opened the door, another candy cane was waiting on the mat. It wasn't the same as the first. This one was broken, the plastic wrapper torn and the sharp end stained with something dark. I locked the door and drew the chain, my pulse racing. This wasn't a neighbor. It wasn't harmless. Someone was playing a game, and I didn't want to know the rules. I tried to focus on the movie, but my mind kept drifting back to the candy canes. I placed them both on the coffee table, side by side. The first was pristine, the kind you'd find hanging on a Christmas tree. The second was jagged, almost menacing. Around midnight I heard it again, but this time, it wasn't a knock. It was the sound of something scraping against the door, slow and deliberate. My chest tightened as I muted the TV and listened, the scraping growing louder, more frantic. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed 911. But just as the operator picked up, the noise stopped. The hallway fell silent, the only sound my ragged breathing. I didn't open the door this time. I stayed on the couch, clutching my phone like a lifeline, until exhaustion finally overtook me. When I woke up the next morning, the candy canes were gone. I told myself it was just a bad dream, a combination of too much sugar and not enough sleep. But as I stepped into the hallway, I noticed something I couldn't explain. The paint around my doorframe was scratched, long gouges running from the top to the bottom like claw marks. And on the floor, in the exact spot where the candy canes had been, was a single strand of red ribbon. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At night, I'd catch glimpses of movement outside the window, dark shapes darting across the snow. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, but every time I looked, it was empty. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. On New Year's Eve, I found the note. It was tucked under my door, written in messy, childlike handwriting on a torn piece of wrapping paper. It read, "You shouldn't have taken it. It wasn't yours." I dropped the note, my hands trembling as I backed away from the door. Taken what? The candy canes? The ribbon? None of it made sense. That night, the knocking returned. Louder. Angrier. The door shook in its frame, the chain rattling as if someone, or something, was trying to break in. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the hallway was empty. They found no footprints in the snow outside, no signs of forced entry. Just me, pale and shaking, clutching the note in my hands. The officer tried to reassure me, saying it was probably a prank, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He suggested I stay with a friend or family member until things settled down. I didn't need to be told twice. I packed a bag and left that night, crashing on a coworker's couch. When I returned to the apartment a week later, everything seemed normal. The scratches on the doorframe had been painted over, the hallway quiet and still. But when I opened the door, I found something waiting for me on the coffee table, a single candy cane, broken in half. And next to it, in the same messy handwriting, was another note. "Next time, we won't knock.